Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, great scholars and great leaders. Thank you so much for joining us once again tonight in this community of leaders, in this super masterclass, as we're discussing leadership. We are discussing a very lovely topic tonight, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know that we learn a lot together every Wednesdays as we meet to empower each other, to inspire each other, to encourage each other. We meet to learn from each other, to unlearn, to relearn, and to co-learn. We are leaders, we are scholars from everywhere, and we are tackling leadership because we have realized that everything revolves around leadership. Anything whatsoever. Yes, it starts from within, it's self-leadership, and you've got to lead others as well. You lead organizations, you've got to lead processes, and you've got to lead institutions, but it starts from self. I always say the most difficult person you'll ever lead is yourself. That is why self-leadership is so important. So yes, we meet every Wednesdays here as the scholars in this community of leaders. My name is Mazwe Majola. I'm from the Worldwide Institute of Leadership and Development. We do this every Wednesdays, and thank you so much to everyone who has joined us tonight. Let me welcome our regulars and our members, those men and women who join us almost every Wednesdays or as often as possible. We learn a lot from each other, and thank you so much for joining us. But a special welcome to those colleagues who are joining us for the first time. If we are here for the first time, you've never joined before, thank you so much for joining us. And we are so welcome. Thank you so much. And please do participate. We'd like to learn from you, as also you'd like to learn from others as well. So tonight it's a very interesting topic, more especially from last week. Last week we were discussing a very interesting topic, water management. And we learned so much from that era. Some of us didn't know that really when the whole universe was created, the creator made it so important that for whatever reason he knows that the majority of water it's under sea, is in the sea. Actually, Professor was addressing us last week, saying that 97% of water is in the sea. Only 3% is in the surface, or is a fresh water or drinkable water, whatever. And also, we learned that South Africa is the 30th driest country in the whole world. So we don't have water. We learned so much. So tonight we are moving into transport. So you can imagine that you're already as scholars and as leaders, it's important to be balanced so that we know as we lead people what is happening around us. So tonight we are discussing the access Gauteng 2050. I like that because we always talk about a long-term vision. Why don't we have a 2050 vision? Why don't we have a 2060 vision? So we do have here in Gauteng, the Access Gauteng 2050, the 25 years Integrated Transport Master Plan. So what will be happening? And we are joined by the expert, my brother Tshepo. It's so wonderful that it's not the first time he's in this session. Tshepo is a Chief Executive Officer at the Gautrain Management Agency. So you're talking about Gautrain, this is the man. He knows the ins and outs of transport. And whenever he addresses and whenever he gives speech about the transport, about what is happening in Gauteng, the transport dynamics, everything, I get to so fascinated because I learn a lot from him. Tshepo has addressed us before, so he's not a stranger in this platform. And I'm so grateful that in his busy schedule, he took time to join us. My brother Tshepo, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. I know you are a very busy person, my brother, but thank you so much for your humility and thank you so much for respecting us in this platform. Here, this I nearly said a bunch of scholars and leaders, but yes, indeed, you've got academics here, you've got leaders from private sector, from public sector, community, religious leaders, scholars from different universities. So yes, it's a platform that we are used to. Last time you mesmerized us, we learned so much about transport. So we are here again, ready to learn from you as we always do. Thank you so much, my brother Tshepo. Over to you. You can address us now. Thanks a lot. Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you for allowing me to address yourself and the esteemed leaders that are on the platform. I am going to take you through the brief version of what they call of Access Gauteng 2050, and in itself, it's probably a 400-page document, and it requires us to be able to think earnestly about the things that we have to do across the whole province. And the question that everybody always asks, what is the problem and what are we trying to resolve as such? So as I go through with them, and a lot more will probably come from the questions as it is. So let's get into it. I'll get into the overview, the context, the conceptual network, and key pillars of the plan. So what is the issue? So in 2013, a new plan was developed. So the first of its kind integrated Transport Master Plan was published in 2014. And in essence, in 2024, we then were able to, it is required that every 10 years we relook at the plan and be able to see whether or not but we had to ask ourselves, what has changed and what do we need to look at? So we have disruptive technologies that have, has obligated that we review the Gauteng transport landscape. Our previous methods of planning, they could only react rather than be able to have a great impact on what we're doing. Our transport needed to be, integrated, needed to be sustainable, and it needed to work across discipline, and that became important. So the Gauteng Transport Network also needs to cater for a number of higher level of what do they call it, people in order they call it in the province itself, and it needs to be seamless. And then we need to have an integrated public transport network that is effective, that is attractive and efficient as a whole. Now, the plan in itself does not exist in a vacuum. What the plan is trying to do is make sure that as we look at Access Gauteng 2050, it's about connecting people, places, and opportunities sustainably. And it's as simple as that. If you ask the people in order they call it in the Transport Authority, what do you do? They will tell you we're connecting people, places, and opportunities sustainably. But the plan itself needs to be effective and innovative. It needs to integrate and bring on new technologies into transport. It needs to enhance the quality of life and support economic growth. That's important because you cannot just have a plan that is just for transport for the sake of transport. It's there to be able to grow the economy, and it has to minimize environmental impact, change the land use patterns, and we'll look at that as we continue and through the data. And then it has to have sustainability and be resilient. it has to answer to the issues that are in Gauteng. So this year's SOPA, or State of the Province address, spoke about the G13 problems, which is, things like cable thefts, potholes, lawlessness, and crime, mushrooming informal settlements, safety in transport, which in itself lends itself to gender-based violence and also other things that are happening there. And then non-functional traffic lights, failing infrastructure within CBDs, and then also address the issue of unemployment. But it has to link up to national priorities, which are inclusive economic growth and job creation, develop a capable state, and then reduce poverty and high cost of living. As we look at that, we have to ask ourselves, does all these plans answer the elevated priorities of Gauteng? Does it bring economic recovery and acceleration? Does it improve the townships? The previous plan had a flaw in it where it looked more at what do they call it, at well-built areas and suburban areas, and left the township areas and chose to not consider the issue of informal settlements. It has to be able to allow us to fight crime and corruption and vandalism and lawlessness. It has to prioritize health and wellness, and then strengthen our capacity to deliver services. What is the context? The economic perspective of what do they call it, of our what do they call it, of our province, despite the fact that relatively speaking to the other provinces, we're the more rich province. We have 49, almost close to 50% of our people not earning enough money, and the low income households are much higher than we had anticipated overall. And if you look at it and you bring on what we now call middle income households, the truth is more than, what do they call it, more than 70% of Gauteng cannot afford the public transport that they use. And in essence, what do they call it? This is the reality of who we are serving. So it's for who. This is the slide that talks to that. We also have to look at our gross value add. And our GVA is an economic marker of where are the areas where we have a lot of input that then converts other products into other products to be able to enable us to generate wealth as a province as a whole. When you look at it, the Santen CBD area and going south into Rosebank and that area, and that's the area that has the sort of light color here in the middle, remains the core anchor of what do they call it, of growth in the province itself. When you look at it in detail and you distribute it properly and also ask what is there and what are the key points that are in those areas, you can clearly see what is out there. This is important because you have to compare it to what we are exporting and what we are importing in a similar graph of this nature. This is also the distribution of residential construction. The distribution of residential construction is important. It is important in the sense that you have to ask yourself, if I had a public transport or a public transport network that was there in 2015, 2016, how much more additional residential areas have I added into it? And have I improved the public transport or the transport system as a whole compared to that? One of the things that you'll see with these two graphs, so it compares residential construction and non-residential construction. And if you look at it properly, the light, so probably the lighter color, which is probably cream or beige, which is 2017, what you will see is that more than 50%, we've increased construction in residential areas and non-residential areas by 50% in the last probably 8 years as a whole, or more than that. In close to 15 years, we have increased the space that we've been working in. And when you look at it clearly and you say, this is a problem. If you've added that much construction, both on residential and non-residential, does the transport system answer the questions that we're asking? Now, the other thing is that what economic sectors are we working in? And if you look at it, a lot of it is government. So our tertiary sectors are government and business services. Business services contain consulting, security, and also other things that sit in there. And then there's also the financial sector that props up the area. Beyond that, we have very, very small activity. Our mining has died, and it's no more, what do they call it, a big part of what contributes to everything that we do. We're not a big agricultural producing province, so therefore, as you can see, it sits on the lower end of everything else. And then the other sectors, which are the sort of the secondary sectors, contribute only 18%. But at the most, you're contributing from government services and business services and the financial sectors. This is an important graphic because it gives you where is the greatest amount of, what do they call it, of improved land use in terms of the areas where, you know, things are changing and people are adding more stuff into land use, both from a residential and a non-residential perspective. One key thing that we made as a decision in 2013 was that we will not build outside of the urban core, and we will densify the urban core. But the building in the urban core and that decision that we made in order to call it in 2013. So if you could look at this graph, you'll see that our non-residential and residential activity of our land use still remains in what we call the urban core, and we've preserved a lot more of, what do they call it, of our green areas and our agricultural and farming area as a whole. And the decision to densify the province has worked out well to a great degree. Now, that in itself also, you have to ask, in that land use, what is residential and what is non-residential, as you look at that. And you can see the bigger the bulbs on the sort of reddish brown graph, it tells you that there's a lot more money being spent in certain areas. It's an important graph for you to assess it in the sense with knowledge and understanding of the area. In certain cases, you looked at, what do they call it, at the information coming through from SARS or from different areas, and you would ask yourself, what is being built over there? I mean, if you look at the R21, R24 area, in that area in Isando, one of the largest areas of expenditure are in that area there. And if you don't have an assessment or a nuanced assessment of these graphs, you would always think, okay, if there's that much money being spent on non-residential areas, then what it means is that we would have to feed transport to that area. A lot more of the development in that area is actually data centers. And data centers themselves are a big worry for energy, but for transport sector, they are quite highly automated, and they do not have that many people working in them. So you also need to have a nuanced assessment of plans like this. If you never learn anything from me, from this conversation, it's very simple. The thicker the line it is on this, what do they call it, on this graphic, the more congestion there is. We are a congested province. Even if I look at it from its simplest form and say, well, on the left-hand side of your screen is the graphic of what we call the optimistic do nothing, or the realistic do nothing scenario. And then on the one end is the optimistic one, and I'll explain the difference between the realistic. The optimistic one says, you know, we think the province is not going to grow as fast as we think it's going to grow, and therefore there will not be that much need of, what do they call it, for additional transport as such. And then on the one end is the realistic one, is that the rate at which the province demographics and what do they call it, and populace grows, we will have a problem. At a rate of 450 people arriving in this province every day to come and stay for good, you will not be able to cope. And therefore, the realistic scenario says to you, we are a congested province, and a congested province that has a bigger problem than the one that you can see on the screen at the current moment. One of the key things about this graph is that what you learn with it is that these days, congestion starts in the suburbs. So it normally starts on the freeway. The freeway is just an agglomerator, and the lines are thicker on the freeways because the areas on the freeway, that's when all the cars come in from the different suburbs. But the suburbs are congested. In this area where I live, what you find is that your congestion start at the gate of your estate. It almost starts on the freeway, and that becomes a problem, and it requires us to rethink public transport from an economic growth perspective, and considering imports and exports. Gauteng in itself, because this becomes another factor. If you fix the public transport issues, but you do not fix the freight and logistics issues, you've got a problem. We import overall more than everybody else in the whole of South Africa. So 66% of all imports coming into South Africa land in Gauteng, and they end in Gauteng. Gauteng also exports 53.6% of all goods within what they call it, the entire nation. And that in itself tells you that we're the smallest landmass, but the most important one, in the sense that you have to worry about what happens here. If it doesn't get sorted out here, then we have a problem. This graphic in itself also tells you who's importing where and in what form are they importing. Are they importing from what sector and in what form? And as you can see, with the areas that on the one GVA, the gross value add graph, had what do they call it, the highest areas of GVA, have the lowest areas of importing and also exporting, because those are services, and services by their nature, they tend to be very difficult for what they call it, for them to be easily exportable. And you need to be able to understand that we need a plan that then enables a province that is able to reindustrialize itself. This is a growth rate that we looked at, and overall where are we and where we've been growing overall as what they call it as a province. The 2020 years the 2020 year was a contraction as a grade, but the provinces continue to grow way more than what they call it, way more than the entire nation, and it's relatively doing very well overall. Also looking at this one in particular is that we are continuing to be the province that contributes the most. And on the one end of the graph, you can see the areas that contribute the most. The area where there's heavy industrialization, like Midrand, and also what do they call it? And there's also big growth in residential areas, still remain the areas that actually has the greatest impact on what do they call it on growth and of the economy as a whole. Big issue. Our what do they call it? Our economy is slowing down and has slowed down quite heavily. And the two graphs, if you look at the two lines on the lower end of it, so our economically active participants are growing, which is the blue line right up on the top. Our rate of absorption of what do they call it, or the creation of jobs overall has lowered. So it has slowed down, and so we've lost jobs and we're not creating more. And therefore, in itself, it has created the unemployment in the province. And that becomes a big issue, because if you've got more and more people being added that are economically active participants, but you are not growing jobs, we need to create a plan that then enables a better way of looking at it. Overall, the one thing Gauteng still continues to do, our economic growth is actually higher than our, what do they call it, our population growth, which in itself it's a better way of, what do they call it, of looking at it. We have also our average annual household growth rate. We have a lot of people coming into the province. We have a growth rate, so we've got a lot more families, but fewer people are having kids in, what do they call it, in the province, and in itself, it's an interesting scenario.
I would.
Something has moved across here, but on this particular slide, this just shows you where people are living and how what do they call it, are they distributed across the whole of the province. In addition to that, when you look at the demographics, this is an important slide, because one of the things that it tells you is that there's a lot of new settlements that have appeared, and a lot more of them are actually informal settlements, and the growth has appeared in areas that we had not planned to build in. And therefore, that means our transport system has to answer to those areas. Some of the places you can't even move the people. We don't even have them a space of where to move them. And then there are areas where the whole province at some point in time will become one huge city, and places are linking up with each other as you look at this particular graph. This one also tells you there was a study that we received about a few months back that showed us that the semi-migration is getting reversed. So people that had moved out of the Gauteng to move to other provinces are returning. Various reasons are brought in. There's no jobs out there, and if the jobs are there, they don't pay as well as the ones in Gauteng. And no matter how much you may not like it here, it's still the best place for you to order the economy. So overall, there's out migration, 123,000 people on average move out, and then but in migration is 288,000, which then we have a net migration of, you can see it, over 160,000 people come into the province overall. So we have a problem. We have a smallest landmass. We need more housing, need more transport, and more of everything, and we need to create jobs overall. From a traffic perspective, our Gauteng travel household revealed that 85% of the people that travel in Gauteng, they travel on minibuses. The flow of information that we have across here, it means we're slowing down, and as we're slowing down the economy as a whole. And then there's also the bit where there's ride sharing, there's the thought of bringing in autonomous vehicles. What does that mean? And then mobility as a service. This is a bit of a graphic that tells you how we looked at our analysis of and simulation of traffic as a whole. As we modeled it, we looked at the land use and the trip rate, and that generates that creates trip generation, and then we move to where we then assess this over and over again. But as you can see, in certain cases we loop it back to where we then can then assess our demand properly, so that it can then give us the kind of public transport. So it's an iterative process more than anything else. In turn, these are the zones that we used. And one of the first few things that this is one of the new things that has been done. This particular model that we use, which is Vism, in this one, we bought the latest version of Vism, and it actually uses artificial intelligence in it. And with us being able to process that much data at that much speed, it allowed us to look at much more smaller and smaller zones within the network in itself. And our analysis, the granularity is so good that it then allows us to be able to can generate congestion at a suburb level. And that in itself was the big part of what we looked at. We also looked at where people come from, and in what do they call it, where are the areas where we're populated the most. As I said, we agreed on not building in the green areas of this map, and that has continued on, and we've done well in that space. From a great position is also for us to be able to look at vehicle occupancy. So we picked a lot of the large freeways and looked at what is happening across the area, and also checked the amount of traffic that was there. So we first did the simulation, and then some of it then it was tested physically on what do they call it, whether the model was giving us. So in the Vism 2024 that we used, with 3,000 areas, and we also tested the AM peak and the evening peak, private vehicle, road-based public transport, non-motorized transport, and rail-based public transport, freight movements, and we also looked at airports in itself. And this yielded the model that showed us that we're a congested province. And the more and more you go deeper into the blue lines are telling you congestion is starting to creep up, and it's creeping into the suburbs themselves. This in itself just gives you the modal split across all, what do they call it, the various. This slide is important. When you look at this slide, it says in the AM peak, this is the do nothing scenario. In the AM peak, you're stuck at home. So as you can see, the inner core of, what do they call it, of the cities are green in the AM peak. But the outer areas of the edges of what they call it, are where the residential areas are, they have those red lines on it. And those red lines are telling you that we are a congested province, and a congested province at the level of what do they call it, at the level of the suburbs. We're no more talking at the level of the freeway. Now, this says to you, public transport can no more assume that somebody is going to drive from their house and drive to a particular point and get public transport there. Public transport must now be in the suburbs more than anything else, and that requires us to rethink our network. This is the do nothing scenario as we look further into what they're going to the 25 year. You can see it gets worse. So it just becomes worse and worse from a relative. This is the do nothing base case scenario. This is the reality of what you will hit in 2050 if we did nothing today. And in turn, that gives you more of the challenges of what we have. So from a freeway perspective, in 2023, the baseline was saying to you, you had a decent proportion of our freeways that still had the ability for what do they call it, for us to carry speeds of over 60 kilometers an hour. And as you progressively look at it, that area gets reduced quite heavily into the, so we end up with less than, what do they call it? Close to less than 50% of our freeways losing their speeds. We're not traveling that fast anyway, so the congestion is already real to all of us. So from an environmental analysis perspective, that's one of the things that we had to look at. Transport still contributes quite heavily to greenhouse emissions. We still remain with heavy urban sprawl, unsafe and inaccessible transport, and our impact on the environment is still big as a whole. So in essence, we have to think differently, and we have to think differently, but collectively we've tried various things and they haven't worked out in the various cities. Current realities, 40% of the people in the province. Remember where I started off, I said to you, you have to look at the demographics, understand who's traveling and why you're doing this for them. People cannot afford public transport, and therefore 40% of the people in the province actually walk to what do they call it, to points of economic activity more than anything else. So non-motorized transport or active mobility becomes a big part of what do they call it. We have remained a car-centric planning province, and therefore we need to be able to change a lot of these things. At best, the non-motorized transport has always been an add-on more than anything else. So from that perspective, the densification challenge is a big problem. Population growth in itself, policy alignment, where we have to start thinking of transit-oriented development and make sure that we have data that we can input into our processes as we continue overall. And this just says we have to digitize, we have to become aware of emerging technologies, leverage existing deployments of technologies, and then be able to glean data from what they call it, from different areas. There are various challenges that you have. Integration is the one issue. Achieving a BRT network that covers the whole, what do they call it? The whole province is one of those issues. There's not enough funding. And then the consensus on the role model of how to do this. And then passenger rail in itself, we still have to move it into the various areas of the province. From a freight logistics point of view, driver shortage, disruption of and looting and arson, banning of trucks at peak hour was an idea that we toyed with at some point in time. Poor conditions of the road that affect fleet, clarity around the use of high, cube containers, the delay at border post, and all sorts of other things that coming into this. The opportunity is that this creates an area where we can have a lot of labor absorbed into. We have to actually manage our overloading control. We also have to deploy a whole lot more of modern technologies in the space. We looked at aviation. In as much as aviation is not a provincial competency, the province has to ensure that accessibility to aviation areas is what do they call it, becomes a key function of the province. So the roads that go to the province, as we build the midfield terminal at OR Tambo, the midfield terminal will not be accessible unless there's a road built that cuts at the back of, what do they call it, of the airport, to then create accessibility. Otherwise, it will not be used and it will not be usable as a whole. So these are some of the things. And then there's also the cascading of various airport. As OR Tambo grows, some of its traffic will then be moved to Lanseria. And then what's the role of Vonnerboom and the Erythropolis and the stacking that goes with that? And how do you prioritize the road network that then enables all of these? One of the things that we got to be able to understand out of this analysis was that some of the ideas that some of the airports must be closed does not actually work, because as you cascade traffic down as the province grows, you will congest the rest of the areas. We are clear about it. Our road condition has deteriorated, and has deteriorated extremely. If you look at the various graphs here, it shows you that the poor and very poor area, what do they call it, of the roads have grown, and have grown by a large percentage, and therefore we need to do more maintenance. In addition to that, the vehicle operating costs have, what do they call it, from the base condition of 2015 have increased by almost close to double of what it was back then. So therefore we need to do something. The road network in itself is not properly integrated. The old planning that was there is important, but we now need to be able to assess the current reality. This is the original conceptual network, which integrates the Gautrain, the extensions to the Gautrain, the PRASA network on rail. And then this is the additional road network that is then required for us to answer the question that came from where the residential areas are, the non-residential areas are, and then ultimately what does it mean? And the green bits of the plan, as you see that, those is what we call the infill. So where roads were terminating in the middle of nowhere and they were not continuous, or if they were continuing, they actually were not developed at a level that it actually. So you, in certain parts of the province, you've got a class 1 road terminating into a class 3 road, whereas you're supposed to cascade it slowly into a class 2 and then a class a class 3. But the truth is, you shouldn't do that. In certain cases, certain nodes and certain routes require us to run a class 1 route one shot, and that's what this plan proposes. In addition to that, we had to look at the public transport nodes, and are they enough? Are they functional? What are they doing? And then we also considered the issue of light rail, and where can light rail be used and rather than building heavy rail. And in a lot of areas, we actually have found a lot of use for light rail as well. This is the conceptual rail network that integrates heavy rail, metro, high-speed rail networks, and in addition to that, it accounts for how we bring in the high-speed rail network into the province, but also answers the fact that we actually have to be able to take public transport into, the trunk routes of what they call a public transport have to be taken into the suburbs, into the locations, into the townships, and they have to account for the actual true movement of people and the desire lines of where people want to go. It's not about how we want to build, but where people want to go. And this is the conceptual network that has been developed that then allows us to be able to cover every bit of the province. And we could refer to this as the Gauteng Super Network. And the Gauteng Super Network accounts for how the Limpopo Rail project comes into this, the Durban Johannesburg rail line comes on the one end, the one that goes to Bloemfontein and ultimately to Cape Town. The Mafikeng line and also the Maputo line comes into this in that way. This is where the plan lends itself. It has 7 pillars. One is sustainability, decarbonize, let's manage our travel demand, and then non-motorized transport has to be brought into this from a digitization and digitally enhancing. We have to make sure that we have travel information is available, automatic fare collection gets finalized, data-centric decision-making is brought into public transport. From mobility as a whole is protect planned transport networks, connectivity to major and proposed economic growth areas must be brought in, and then facilitate mobility, land use, aligned land use to transport as a whole, coming into bringing a policy view on what do we view transport-oriented demand development, and in turn, could we create what we call a 15-minute city. So if you're moving within a city, you should not be 15 minutes away from where you need to be. And then we have to make sure that the multi-sectoral coordination occurs. Freight in itself is a big part of what we have to do. We have to build the freight bypasses, bring a lot of stuff into road and rail, and then strategic public transport, bringing back into the fold the minibus taxi industry. They carry 85% of the people now. You're not going to wish them away. And therefore, we have to actually bring them into the fold more than anything else. And then passenger safety, rebuild the recovery of what do they call it, of commuter rail. And then go back to where rail is the backbone of public transport and transport as a whole in the province. And then there's the issue of building a capable state, enablement and effective implementation, adequate resources, bring budget in, sound governance, have a capable, state entity that can do this, improve our intergovernmental, so have the municipalities working well with the province, and then build capacity, build the capability to be able to do this work. Prof, I'll leave it there.
Wow, thank you so much, Tshepo. Thank you so much, my brother. Very comprehensive there. As you can see, the transport network in Gauteng, very technical as well. Hopefully, you'll be unpacking some of the areas for us here. Those of us who are not technical. If I may just ask you, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, now we are entering to the conversation phase for those who are joining us for the first time. So if you want to ask any question, please do. Now it's the time. So if I may just ask Tshepo, I think there's somewhere where you mentioned that about 80% of the travelers, they are using minibuses. And I assume most of them will be from the townships. There are those who are staying in the suburbs as well, but you seem to be saying that there are more concentration in the suburbs, which the density of travelers from there. Out of the 80% is for minibuses. This 20%, how is divided between Gautrain, your normal train buses, private vehicles, and you did say that 40% of people, they walk because they can't afford transport. But how are they spread over in terms of, or rather that 20% in terms of other public transport mode?
So in terms of rail, with the demise of PRASA, we're sitting at 7% at this current moment. Buses were sitting as the next chunk, which was in and around 9%. And then the rest of it is taken up by e-hailing and and cycling and other forms of, what do they call it, of other transport.
So it's true that if really the taxis, the minibus taxis, were to, stop, were to close everything, or just stop for 1 week, that the economy will collapse because of what they're doing.
So with the improvement of PRASA and with them being able to recover, I think they've recovered 35 out of the 40 main corridors. When we emphasize that main corridors, with them coming back on stream, yes, it's true. Without the taxis, if you took the taxis out of what do they call it? In 2017, we built a new mobility app. That what do they call it? That we built a new mobility app that allowed you to be able to see all public transport across the province. The original plan was for it to not have the taxis in it because the information was quite sketchy and all of that. Every time you switched off that layer of what do they call it that had the taxis in it, 70% of the province had no transport whatsoever. So it is a great impact. It goes beyond just simply thinking through if they stop, what happens. It's about us being able to understand. Somebody I was talking to one of the guys in the taxi industry, and he says, "You see, the nice thing that he has always loved about the taxi industry is that they are not like us. They don't do feasibility studies. When you build a mall here, they bring one guy with a radio standing there and another one standing somewhere else where the taxis need to come from. And by the end of the week, they now have a route that is established in that mall. And which I found quite interesting overall as being, what do they call it, the simplest way. They're the most agile business that can react to anything across the, what do they call it, across the network.
Perfect there. Sorry, my brother. And it's so encouraging that the economic growth is higher than the population growth, and hopefully, let's hope it stays there as we manage ourselves. I see my sister there, Uyanda Sibia. Over to you, sis.
I think my brother here just spoke of the taxi industry. One of the things that we learned about the taxi industry is their impact on our security cluster. I mean, we were told some of our most advanced military support or individuals that are fully trained, where they're spending over $1 million on a person, they're sitting within the taxi industry. So I'd like to know more about at what level do they consult the taxi industry in terms of the intel that they have from the security cluster? Because from what former Minister Begicele gave us, is that they are sitting with a lot of intel from our security cluster, and they are able to plan for their routes and everything better than even government can.
Thank you. Thanks, Uyanda. Thanks, my sister. You can take that one, Tshepo.
Thank you, Prof. So I speak to the taxi industry probably on a daily basis, in various layers, and I speak to the industry both at its highest level and on the ground. So one of the things that most people don't know, the small buses that I run around town, the 22-seater Mercedes-Benz buses that we run here, are actually operated fully by the minibus taxi industry. And we in the 11 years that I've been back in the Gautrain and have been managing this setup, we've actually managed to grow it into different regions without us ever having a taxi war outbreak. The problem with the taxi industry and the lack of understanding from a lot of people is very simple. They have a saying in what they call it in the taxi industry: nothing for us without us. So when you understand that and you afford them and you allot them what do they call it, the respect that they require as business people, as some of us don't regard them as business people, then you lose the essence of being able to share a lot of information with them. And sometimes I would know months ahead before something is going to happen, and we're able to share and actually resolve most problems within Gauteng much quicker than in other provinces, because we have a great relationship with them. When they get unhappy, they actually would ask for them to be able to engage the MEC directly, and therefore we would be called into that meeting and we would engage openly, but we engage through respect. And that becomes an important issue. They're not going to share the information that they have with you if you do not show them the respect that says they are business people like you, and they have, what do they call it, they have a need to be able to build a business, and through that you need to then be able to work with them accordingly. And over the last 11 years, I can walk around anywhere without me worrying about anything about the taxi industry, because we have a great relationship with them, and I've used that, or they call it, that great relationship with them, to be able to engage them openly about various things, openly not only about the good things that they do, but openly about also the difficulty that they create when they create illegal taxi rank, when they drive, what do they call it, the wrong way around on the freeway, when they drive on the yellow lane and everything else. All of those things we've engaged openly, but we've engaged with respect. And what most people who speak ill of the taxi industry tend to miss is the fact that you have to bring on the respect, and they will share as much as possible of, what do they call it, of the inner workings of. So sometimes when, what do they call it, when we used to have these meetings, we couldn't even have them here in the building, because the amount of guns that come to that meeting are just incredible. At that point in time, I only have 2 cell phones. That's all I'm carrying with me. So it's a it's about you being able to understand that you have to. And with that, I'm not that worried about it. And over a period of time, they've actually gotten to a point where the taxi bosses can come together in one place. So, and an anecdotal story that I could tell you is that the taxi wars that used to happen, in, what do they call it, in Alexandra, what ended up happening is that the ATA and Amstra, which are the two largest taxi associations in Alexandra, were fighting each other. And we forced them into a partnership into what is called ATS, the Alexandra Taxi Services, Alexandra Transit Services. And that entity has been going for the last 12 years. We've written case studies about it that get shared with the entire globe. And they've stopped fighting each other because they have a common interest of business as a whole. So that in itself is, we've built a model on how to actually quell that, what do they call it. Nobody is against making money. If you can show people how to make money, they stop fighting in their nature. But that's just a sidebar story of, what do they call it, some of the success of what we've managed to do with engaging properly with the taxi industry.
Perfect. Thank you, my brother. Thank you so much. Any thoughts there, ladies and gentlemen? And while they are coming, Tshepo, what's the impact of Gautrain? Obviously, in the routes that currently it's having, and we've been hearing about the expansion of Gautrain into other areas as well. I stay in Little Falls, and I can't wait to have that station that have been mooted, that there will be a Gautrain station in Little Falls. How far is that, and when will that be, or likely happening?
So we actually are already regulated. So I'm in the midst of the fundraising process. So the state in itself will not, we're clear about it, will not be able to afford the project as it stands right now. There are other bigger pressing priorities, and so there's more an issue of creating a bigger pool of money that will come from the private sector, and rather allow government to actually create a setup where they guarantee payments or repayments for the work itself. So we are almost there. So as we do the next in the next few weeks, we will. So the Minister of the National Minister of Transport made a few announcements over the weekend, and which then have carried us through the week. overall. And then in the next month or two, we will then make our own announcements as Gauteng on how far we are. In addition to that, we're also looking jointly with the Limpopo government on the Limpopo Rail project. The concept study has been completed. The feasibility on the Gautrain is done, and it's just awaiting funding and for us to move with that and guarantees from national government. And then overall, we are more closer than we were about a year and a half back now to actually seeing the Little Falls station as a reality. But we're also considering, as you saw on the network, we're also considering what does the implications of this plan. And as I showed you in the earlier slides, that we're a congested province, and now we are congested within townships, informal settlements, and suburbs. That's where the problem lies now. So we had to rethink the plan and bring it to be able to answer the correct questions rather than just hitting a point saying, I need to go to Soweto, I need to go to Mamelodi. It's where's the congestion and where can we resolve the challenges of the problem. So we had to stop a little bit with the previous feasibility study to just align to the realities of what the modeling was showing us.
And the impact of the Gautrain, the current one, the station that are there, Rosebank, Sandton, Marlborough, and others. What is the impact?
Yes, so that is an important question in the sense that when we did the 2019-2020 study of the economic impact of Gautrain across the entire province, it showed that every station that has, every area that has a station in it had higher house prices as compared to anywhere else. So within the 5 to 10 kilometer radius of the station, people could sell their houses on the basis of, what do they call it? So they could sell their, what do they call it? They could sell their houses for much higher prices. Also, in terms of commercial and buildings, you could actually let out your buildings for a much higher rental value than anywhere else. So when you look at places like, so the story we always tell, which is the truth, before the Gautrain station was built in Rosebank was a drug den, and it was degenerating at an incredible rate, and it was just about to become another forgotten suburb. Now it's one of the hottest property regions in what they call it in the whole of this province, and that in itself, all the properties there are sold on the proximity to the Gautrain station. And it's at the current moment, Rosebank property market is booming heavily, and that in itself has created a bigger impact. The big issue that still we are recovering from in the Sandton area is that with the work from home phenomenon, a lot of the buildings in Sandton are sitting at over 30%, vacancy, and that in itself, well, with people returning quickly, I mean, we've seen a ramp up. I mean, in the last 3 months alone, we've seen an increase of 12% on our numbers on the system, which means that people are returning to the offices. So that is being reduced. So Sandton had slowed down a little bit in terms of its development, but you will see as we continue forward, it will then bring up the increases back onto there. So what's the reality of it? If I took out, at the current moment, we're sitting at 37,000 riders on the, what do they call it, on the Gautrain daily. If I took that and I put it back on the freeway, give or take with a, what do they call it, the car ownership of, what do we call it, and when we did our market segmentation, the car ownership of Gautrain users sits at in and around 85%. So 85% of the people that are on the Gautrain right now, and that's the 37 to 35,000, you can do the calcs. It tells you you've got another 30,000 vehicles that we can put back on the road. And then you will see the 2050 numbers immediately now. So the freeway speeds that I was showing to you that are going to come later will appear immediately. And that's the one impact that most people don't realize. I still remember one day I was at one of the local stores where I live, and the person behind me didn't know that I worked for the Gautrain. And he said something interesting, because at that point in time we were having a strike of the drivers, and people had now gone back into the cars, and it had gone on for I think 15 days. And he said, can the people that use the Gautrain go back to the Gautrain so that we can go back to driving on our roads with ease? And he had become aware that the traffic has changed just purely from the Gautrain not functioning within that 15 days as a whole. So there's a bigger impact. But one of the surprising outcomes which came from the South African Property Owners Association of South Africa was that they showed that over a period of 5 years, 59% by value of the buildings that had been built, commercial buildings that had been built mostly in and around, what do they call it, around Gautrain station. So the transport nodes are not just there to be able to ferry people to where they need to. They also create a big economic development. And as we update our economic development as we're closing out the current concession, I will make sure that as we close that, I will come and share it with you and show you the outcomes of the 15-year impact of the Gautrain on what they call it on the economy of this province.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I do realize, ladies and gentlemen, that obviously some of you might be not what, I don't want to use the word bored, but because obviously we've got many people who are coming from outside of or in other provinces in South Africa, but also we've got many colleagues who are coming from other countries as well, other than South Africa. But the reason why, as we are discussing this, is what Tshepo said earlier on, that it's a very small province in South Africa in terms of geography, but the economic hub of the whole continent, because just the GDP of Gauteng is bigger than many countries, or the GDP of many countries in the continent. So that's why we are discussing the importance of the transport network. Actually, the G20 is coming here in few weeks' time. It will be coming here in this province, in the Gauteng. I see Sisuyanda want to come back there. Over to you, Sisuyanda.
Yes, thank you so much. Tshepo, your presentation was informative. I actually worked for Gauteng Economic Development many years ago. When the Gautrain was starting, I just wanted to have a better understanding in terms of the transport networks as we sit today. And I think you have assisted me to, just put the dots and understand the dynamics of what keeps you winning within that space. I mean, the Gautrain is very useful to most of us. It really has changed our lifestyles in terms, especially on the route going to the airport. It's made it easier for us to access the economic hub in terms of transportation if you are leaving the country or you are traveling to other sides of South Africa. And really, it's well maintained. I think you're doing a great job. And props to you and your team. And you must continue to win. We do support the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanga.
Thank you. Thank you. And anything there from the chat room? Let's see. There's just some greetings there from Ngobani and Keith. Extremely insightful, Tshepo. Your narration of the study gives a clear perspective. Thank you. And Bosono Oludimeji. So delighted to have been an attendee in this transport study. Thank you, Professor Tshepo Khobe. Now, that's a challenge there, Tshepo. you can, with this platform, you'll definitely be a professor very soon. And the Worldwide Institute of Professor Mazwe, including Professor Beatrice, Professor Beatrice addressed us last week, who sent a Zoom link to me. Oh, wonderful. I suppose the colleague is from Nigeria. Thank you so much, the Professor Ola Dimeji. Thank you so much for those content. Any thoughts there, Tshepo? And maybe one or two, then we'll close the session. But any thoughts from what Uyanda Sibia said?
Prof, we will continue to make sure that the Gautrain functions properly, because the impact of the Gautrain across the entire province it has changed, and I like what you said. You said it has changed people's lifestyles. One of the things that we got out of that study, and maybe even before we do the we do the new study and be able to reveal what the new economic impact of the Gauteng Gautrain is, I need to bring the 2019-2020 study so that we can then look at it. And one of the insights that came out of it was that Gautrain gives people who would have been sitting on the freeway 1.5 hours going to work and 1.5 hours coming back, easily on a daily basis, we give them back 2 hours of their time that they would have been sitting idle. And remember, most people don't really consider the amount of time that they waste trying to get out of places like Sandton. Because the truth is, getting out of Sandton in today's terms takes more than 45 minutes. So they count their time on the freeway. But the true time of traveling from Sandton to your home, it's actually normally 2 hours in one direction. And using the Gautrain, you park your car, you get on to the system, get to Sandton. You are 5 minutes walking from your place of work, and that in itself has proved that we've changed a lot of people's lifestyle. We've given a lot of kids their parents back that used to sit on the freeway. And they now are able to spend time, do homework, do a whole lot of other things. But we're doing a whole lot more. So long-term wise, when I took over this job, I said, I want to transform transport into a lifestyle product. And a lifestyle product in such a way that it becomes natural for us as Gauteng people to not think of taking our keys every time we want to go anywhere. It must be natural for us to be able to think everything I need to have will be in and around the station, in and around the transport node. And therefore, I don't need to do any other thing except just simply, if I'm driving, I will drive to the nearest station and then move to the next bit. So a lot of that work we're doing now, and we spend a lot of the last year and a half putting it into reality. And we're finalizing with the board, we finalized the new strategy of the entity in itself. And we have a simple vision, a world-class mobility solution. That's the simplicity of it. We need to remain world-class, and we need to remain being a mobility solution. We've intentionally left rail out of it because we recognize at some point in time, we will be running buses, running light rail systems, and running various monorail systems and everything else that goes with that. So to us, it becomes important that we're a world-class mobility solution, and we look forward to impacting every other life. Over the last 15 months, I've spent the last 15 months also being the CEO of the Transport Authority of Gauteng, the interim CEO of the Transport Authority of Gauteng, which is actually the entity that hosts the Integrated Transport Master Plan, and it's their role to be able to roll it out. And in as much as I'm tired, but it has been one of the most fulfilling 15 months or what do they call it of my career, because I've actually managed to bring to fruition a plan that has, so the options are very simple, Prof. It's either 4.5 percentage growth in what do they call it and greater than 4.5% growth in the economy, or 1.2 or even a contraction is a reality in order to call in Gauteng if we do not implement this plan. So this plan is a non-negotiable, and we've made it in such a way with the team that it's implementable and it can be resourced easily over the 25 years.
Thank you, Tshepo. I see Vusi there. Just before I take Vusi, let me just ask this question. Is it a plan that or is it based on the current governing party, or is it a plan that will still be there irrespective of whoever takes over? Because we are talking about 2050, so we don't know what will happen in 10 years' time, what will happen in 20 years' time. If there is whatever, there's a change of governing parties, will the plan change or will still continue depending what is happening at the time? And then I'll take Umapolo by the after.
Okay.
Yes.
Prof, I've built my career on being what do they call it, properly be when I advise government, I advise them properly, and I make sure that they understand what I'm saying. So here's one simple thing, Prof, and there's the one thing that is apolitical. It's congestion. It cares very little what party you voted for. When you wake up and you're now stuck on the freeway, nobody knows that's a person from that party and that's a person from that party. And therefore, even if any other party took over, the reality and the succinct manner in which we modeled this particular plan and simulated the challenges that will come in the future, those challenges are coming. They care very little about who runs the province. You either are a political party that will resolve the problems, or you are a political party that will be seen out of the way after 5 years because you did not listen to the reality of that. My role is for me to not be political. It's for me to be able to advise government accordingly, so that we are clear about it. And that's why we had to have this plan. This plan, we were finished with it around July, May, somewhere there. And I had to run it through EXCO, through the various political subcommittees, and ultimately through EXCO, so that it gets adopted as a plan for the province rather than being a plan for a political party. And it required us to be able to be clear that this is a plan that needs to be implemented. It's the plan or congestion. Those are the only two ways in which this can happen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. My brother Vus Ngobo, over to you.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Prof. Tshepo, job well done, my brother, for the Gautrain. I think the province needed such a mode of transport. What I wanted to ask from you, with regards to your pricing structure, I know that there is an investment. You need to basically pay back whatever loan that you guys took. But in terms of your price structure, does your price structure speak to all the LSMs, that are basically utilizing your transportation, which is your Gautrain? Because, I mean, going to the airport, it costs about 300 Rand right now, So I know that's a different LSM. And is that price being benchmarked globally, or it's just a price that was based on the investment that was invested in this mode of transport? Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Vusi. You've asked me a multitude of questions, but let me answer them slowly. So our pricing structure in itself, remember, as you clearly said, the user pay principle applied over public transport. And Prof, if you could allow me a minute for me to sort of take a lecturer's position for a few minutes before I go back to the question in itself. So, in its simplicity, the user pay principle works, and then I'm going to simplify it rather than making it complicated. If you build something for 10 billion rands and you said, I want to recover the money over a period of 10, 15 years, and I'm going to charge people, and you say, now, how much do I need to charge people so that I can recover my money and then also make a bit of profit in the money that I had spent building this thing? And then you come to a price of 100 rands. And that 100 rands in itself becomes the price that you must charge. And that's what the user must pay to be able to access your service themselves. But we recognize one simple thing. Transport is a social service and transport is an economic enabler. And in turn, what we do is we actually subsidize the portion of the, what do they call it, of that transport amount. So in essence, on what do they call it, when you target a particular LSM, you then say, how much can they afford? The actual pricing of the Gautrain is actually slashed by 50% as it is right now. The normal price that you know is slashed by 50% because the 50% comes from the subsidy, which we tend to refer to as the patronage guarantee in itself. Now, what have we done in the last 18 months? What we've done in the last 18 months, we've actually introduced products that then cater to the lower LSM market. We've introduced products that, so you've seen our Clever Mover campaign. Clever Mover campaign recognizes that anybody who earns less than 350,000 rands a year will not be able to afford getting on the Gautrain. And therefore, we have slashed the normal Gautrain prices by 50%. We've also gone forward and slashed the prices for students by 50% naturally in itself. And we are now looking at a scholar and senior citizen product, and it will also come at more than 50% discount as a whole. We recognize that our pricing cannot continue. During the time when PRASA was not functional, people couldn't get on the Gautrain, and therefore that's what grew the taxi industry's use more than anything else. Yes, our pricing overall on average, we've just tested it now against global numbers. It sits at probably about 35% above the average norm of the global pricing. And that in itself is an issue, and which says to us, we actually need to discount more across the board. We have just allowed the price to gallop on the basis of CPI year on year. But in a compounded form, we've actually grown the price by double what it's supposed to be at this point in time. So the global average of what do they call it of metro systems on general passenger services is about between $3 to $5 on there, and we sit on the upper quartile of those numbers, with us sitting in and around $7 to $8 somewhere there for some of the pricing. But funny enough, the price that we thought was high, which is the APS, the upward passenger services, actually comes in line, and it is lower by 30% than the global average of APSs. APSs, by their nature, their business model is like that. It's a particular LSM, and it's an LSM that doesn't want to miss their flight. They are rushing somewhere, and they want to get there on time and order there. We also are considering whether or not we're keeping that product as we get out of the current concession agreement, whether we will keep that product. The most likely is we will discount it also by what do they call it, by a certain amount. So since I became a CEO, Prof. Majola, I'm worried about pronouncing on numbers because once I say it, everybody chisel it into a block of marble, and I will never forget the number. But we will discount the airport passenger airport pricing. We recognize that we sit on the upper, what do they call it, on the upper end of what globally systems like ours charge. And therefore, we've introduced the Clever Mover. We've introduced the Ride with the G campaign with the student, and it has shown incredible numbers. 80% or no, so in actual fact, 65% of the people who have registered to be able to use the Clever Mover actually appeared in the low LSM regions of Marlborough, which is where Alex is, the city center of Johannesburg, and also the city center of what do they call it, Midrand, and the city center of Pretoria. And that to us, it says the product was the correct thing to put into the market, and it is functional. So to a great degree, our pricing is out of kilter because of the year-on-year compounding. and we're looking at bringing on in the new concession arrangements or the new operational arrangements, we take over pricing, and that gives us. But I started off with explaining the user pay principle. When you discount, the issue is there's a cost to public transport, and that cost to public transport must be borne by somebody. And that's where subsidies come. So when you discount, you need to top up with subsidies. And at this point in time, we need to be comfortable that topping up with subsidies takes money from everywhere else in the, what do they call it, in the budget, because we are all in the same, what do they call it, bath, and we are fishing in the same pond for the same amount of money. So we also have to be clear that any discounting, so whatever you take off the top has to be taken on by subsidy, and therefore we are working with, what do they call it, with both national government and provincial government to make it affordable, because it is also one of the very few rail systems that go directly into the core of cities. And so the rest of the networks they bypass the core of cities, and it is important that it can carry a whole lot more. As we recapitalize it, we have to be able to find a different funding model, and even the building of the Soweto line and the new lines are built on a completely different funding model. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, my brother. Thank you, Tshepo. Thanks a lot. And I'm so glad that we found you, because again, in South Africa, for those who are connecting from outside of South Africa, is that October is a transport month. So it's the end of October. This is our last session in October. When we come back next week, will be in the first week of November. So we are so happy that we managed to get Tshepo just to talk about transport, because it's a very important area in South Africa. As I said, we said, again, Gauteng is a small province, but is a 2.4 trillion GDP, or 2.4 trillion rand GDP province. So you can see that it's when they say it's an economic hub of Africa or the continent, it's a very, very important. So thank you so much, my brother. But can you give us your parting shots or any closing remarks? Then we'll close the session after that.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, there is no option of not executing on the plan. This plan is about us connecting people, places, and opportunities sustainably. It's about us thinking through our future in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. It's about us making sure that the ordinary man can afford to be able. It's about not only integrating, but creating access. Access Gauteng 2050 has been named as such, and it will probably be the long-term war cry of, what do they call it, of government in Gauteng as a whole, because it's about creating access. It's about creating access to economic opportunities, creating access to job opportunities, and ultimately creating that access in a sustainable manner. I'll leave it there, Prof.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you so much, Tshepo, for availing yourself. As we said, you're a very busy person, but this presentation was very insightful and informative, and it's very important for us, whether you're staying here in Gauteng or in other provinces in South Africa, but you know that you'll always be affected by what is happening in Gauteng. That is why it's important that we understood this plan, that at least there is this plan on the table, and we hope everything would go well with it. So thank you so much for availing yourself and for empowering us tonight. We've learned a lot, and this was a very, very instructive and informative session. Thank you very much, my brother. And to everyone, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, especially to those who joined us for the first time. Thank you so much for joining us. Please do remember that we meet every Wednesdays. We'll be here again next week, Wednesday, for another session with another great speaker, as we always do in this platform. These are our super master classes. You will never be disappointed. Every Wednesday we are here. Thank you so much. Now the session is adjourned until we meet again next week, Wednesday. May God bless you and may God bless our continent, Africa. Kosi Segalele Africa. Thank you so much and goodbye. Thank you until we meet
Thank you,
again
Prof.
next week. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye. Bye.